welcome to The Indie Brew, a new series where I sit down with some amazing indie developers and talk all about their game dev journeys. In today's episode, I chat to Scott and Artiom, the dynamic duo that leads Hilltop Studios, and chat about their debut game, Lil Guardsman, a fantasy game with a comedy twist that sees you step into the boots of a 12-year-old manning the gate to the kingdom and determining who to let through. So grab a cup of your preferred caffeinated beverage and let's hear from Scott and Artiom.
So I like to kick this off with one of my favourite questions. What is your preferred or favourite caffeinated beverage?
Go ahead. I think I would go, if I had to choose one, which probably is already answering the question, I'm going to go with cappuccino. I think right mix of milk and coffee. I don't feel like I'm drinking a gallon of hot milk sometimes if I get that. So that's kind of nice. That's my choice.
Yep.
I like a latte, and I think at first my wife was grumpy that I bought a very fancy coffee machine, but now she's also addicted to the coffees it makes. So yeah, I feel like having a really nice coffee maker has ruined coffee shops for me because I can do it well at home.
Yep, that's fair. I mean, Melbourne is known. I'm in Melbourne and we're known for coffee. So we have a fancy coffee machine, but the coffee is still better in the cafes, which is nice. So how did you get into creating games? How did this come about?
Do you want to do that one?
Sure. We came to it in a really unusual way. My background is in the performing arts and as a composer and as a musical director in theater. So I worked for 15 years. I worked on musicals, and also writing musicals. So, I mean, I feel like my brain is very configured to stories and storytelling. And I've been a lifelong gamer, lifelong nerd. So it was actually Artiom who one day was like, hey, I think we should make games together. So how did you get there?
Yeah, I've made things before, but not professionally. And in my civilian life, I worked in the startup world before games, and then pandemic, thankfully, wow, what a sentence to say, but thankfully came along and let me do a bit of a reset. And Scott and I have known each other for coming up on 20 years. So we often talk about Hilltop as a studio that started by two best friends. And yeah, he kind of yes-anded me while we were hanging out outside. That was the only way to see each other for a while.
I don't know if I want to make everyone relive the trauma, but in Canada and in Toronto, the COVID lockdown stuff was very intense. So to hang out, we'd have to do it outside. So we started going on these really long bike rides, these basically 100-kilometer bike rides together. And if anyone who exercises, which is usually not me, knows by the end, it's like you're drunk. By the end, your brain is shut down a little bit. So that's where we our good game ideas happened once sort of those uninhibited thoughts on these bike rides came along.
And then I think just the biggest thing for us was we'd always played games together. We talked about it, but it was on those rides talking about making games professionally. It really was really interesting to see how much both of us had a lot of really in-depth information about old games that we had played together, being what do you think they did this and that? And turns out that was kind of a professional intuition that actually worked for us, which was really cool, amazing kind of luck.
Yeah. So was it something you'd always thought about doing, or was it just born of pandemic madness?
I can start with that one. I didn't. I mean, I've wanted to do creative work more professionally, more commercially for a long time, but I'm an immigrant's kid. There was 3 jobs I could do. It could be a lawyer, it could be a doctor, it could be an accountant. Those are the 3 opportunities I was allowed to pursue for a long time. And what happened was I just got to this point where I wanted to work on something I cared about. This thing where it's even if you're reading the most boring piece of technical documentation on a Wednesday evening, and you're still this is fun. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting to do this. That's what I wanted to connect with. And for me, gaming was that. It was this really special place of this brand new medium that we're all still figuring out. This brand new place where we're still getting to invent genres, which is really cool. Yep. So that was a big one. And then having Scott, who's kind of was doing it for a long time, and I think sort of took my hand on kind of enabling that creative work.
For me, I had always dreamed about composing music for video games. And as a composer, that was the obvious link to it. But then it took Artiom bullying me to be no, you can write it. You can design this with me. And it's sort of a funny thing about Lil Guardsman is yes, I composed the score and I'm so proud of it, but that feels like the smallest part of my work on it, even though it's sort of my core identity piece. Like everything else I did on Lil Guardsman felt bigger and felt kind of more significant, but it's sort of in the fallout after releasing the game, it's sort of been like, oh yeah, I composed that music.
Yep.
And so you mentioned you both have been gamers, lifelong gamers. What were some of your favorite games growing up?
The thing that sort of united us and the thing that started our conversation about making games is our love of classic adventure games, which I think in some cases are sort of the cozy games. Due to technical limitations in a big way, but I'm a voracious adventure gamer and classic adventure gamer. So all of the LucasArts games, all of the Sierra games, and then all of these like obscure European games. There's a bunch of video games I feel like I'm the only person who played, which is impossible, but maybe in Toronto it's true. But then from there, I'd say my second favorite genre is RPGs, and then sort of going out from there even further is anything with a good story, any narrative game. And there's a big thing about like, well, adventure games died, which is patently false. There have been lots of adventure games have continued to be made since they died. But I do love as sort of the ambition of gaming grew and sort of technical capabilities of gaming grew. The best things about adventure games are in every genre. Like looking at like the Wolfenstein, pretty straight down the middle shooter, killer storytelling. I mean, Half-Life 2 did that first with a shooter with amazing stories. But yeah, I feel like the adventure game is alive and well even outside of adventure games. And that's not your question, but I just took it and ran.
Adventure games were a big inspiration.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think the first one we talked about crossing over was Monkey Island 3. I think was the one that kind of went with this much more animated style, but we both like Guybrush, and those are like that's like a through line of a character that we like, and I think about as designers. I think it's kind of a storytelling mode, puzzle design mode. I think what did die with adventure games was a kind of very specific design for puzzles that kind of is, I still think is great, but I think we are patently in the minority when we say that right now. Things will just always come back. I think they have their time.
And to elaborate on that, I feel like we have seen the end of the like pick up lots of items, try every possible configuration in a way that's not super logical. And then I also think in classic adventure games, the great ones didn't, but one of the tropes is a lot of backtracking. A lot of you've traveled, you get something, and then you have to just sort of have like dead zones that you have to travel back on.
You're trying to maybe I don't know the intent of that design team. If we ever get to ask them, we can ask them, but like probably a little bit padding the time on the runtime of the game. But yeah, that was also my start, and then we can talk about it, but Scott and I then kind of tend to consume very differently. RPGs is one of the areas we cross over. I tend to be on the more shooter side a little bit, and then professionally now I'm kind of an omnivore.
Yes.
For games.
And I'm going to call you out. You're also a big strategy game guy.
Yeah, in
a way that I'm not.
I do love a good spreadsheet with graphics. Not professionally, just in my gaming collection. Every so often, the beast in me needs to be awakened for it.
I can relate to that one.
Thank you. I feel supported.
How do you think these games kind of inspired you as designers?
I think one of the pieces is that there's still always this discussion of, what's the place of storytelling in games? And those are very narratively heavy games. They have characters. Those characters have arcs. They have kind of rising action, falling action. We can talk about it all day. But I think Scott's right. Like it kind of has permeated a lot of things. One of the pieces that we learned early on is that for a long time in gaming, writing gets added right at the end. It's kind of the afterthought. It's sort of how you tie all the mechanics together. Not always is a big industry, but I think that impact kind of continues to live on because we all connect with stories. We all like stories, and Scott and I like characters and stories in our games. I think that's kind of one of the big things that always connects for both of us. If it's fully not present, I don't think we can do it as much. So I think that's one piece. And then something that I personally love, like Night in the Woods is a game that I love. It obviously deeply inspired, I think. Lil Guardsman is just also flat 2D classic animation. I think there's just something really special about it. That's sort of the route that I was going down before I kind of took a detour. But like animating and inking and line art were all things that I loved. So that was a big one. I don't know. How else would you add to it? It's such a complicated area.
It's interesting because one of our targets for Lil Guardsman was to sort of capture the charm of the sort of the comedic LucasArts games. But we didn't ask, like the writing team was myself and two other writers who are both phenomenal comedians, Jeremy Lapalme and Matt Bernard. We didn't have them play any of those games. So like I had in my head what we were going for, but I didn't make the whole team sort of align around them because I didn't want to mimic those games. So when a couple of reviews have called out that like Lil Guardsman sort of has the feel of 90s LucasArts games. That feels like we hit the target. In terms of other influences, I mean, the big one we like talking about is Papers, Please. Obviously, our game was branded and marketed as Papers, Please like that's fantasy and comedy. And we think Lucas Pope is a genius. I freaking love the Oberdin game. We're excited to play his new Playdate game. And Papers, Please was a big inspiration. But it sort of functioned as a jump off point. Like it sort of like it gave us like Guard Shed, it gave us like controlling and discovering story through the people coming through this gate. But sort of beyond that initial comparison, we really let go of it. So I think he is certainly a core influence, but I don't think we stuck too closely to Papers, Please.
I think going back to what we're saying, where gaming is this place where a lot of new genres are still being invented, I'd say Lucas Pope is probably one of the best ones in the industry for kind of continuing to come up with new genres and then showing it and doing it. And some of them take off and some of them are, I feel like, still lots of opportunity to explore.
Yeah.
So Papers, Please was one of those ones. We knew that people kind of liked sitting. The other pieces also we're independent game developers. And so and that also, again, could encompass lots of different kind of makers. There's sort of our small team. There's also solo people effectively like Lucas. And one of the things we wanted to make a game that we could make, if that doesn't sound too silly,
and make a game that we could finish.
And we wanted it to be, bug free and fixed and working, and that's something that kind of is just hard when you go out and play and it doesn't work. You can't be perfect. It's very complicated to QA everything. We try our best, but yeah. So that piece around sort of this mechanic of you kind of meet somebody, you talk to them, you learn about them, and you make a decision. And it's in one setting, I think was a very intentional design choice because we wanted to have something that would give us lots of space to explore the stories and characters, and that kind of meant we could give up having to have them be traveling through 50 different worlds, and just not in our first game, not on that one.
Just on that, the original plan for Lil Guardsman was it would only exist in the shed. And you'd sort of uncover the story just through the characters coming up. If you've played the game, you know that a big chunk of the game is going out and exploring these locations, finding the characters after they've been let in. And it's a bigger world than just the shed, but we messed up. We wanted to keep it like really small and really tight, but we couldn't resist expanding the world.
But, what we found was, I think, again, I'd love to at one point maybe talk to Lucas and see what he figured about it, but I think in his game, when you have something where it's sitting in the one location and you never meet anything else, it's part of that kind of oppressive environment that you're always under. It's got the...
You're trapped.
You're trapped, and you're kind of... You feel there's no dissonance with the story, which is about oppression. We're a comedy game, so it's completely different. So it, screamed... As soon as we started building the early stuff, we were like, this is screaming for a counterweight that we want to counterbalance with. We also Scott came up with the sprawl and kind of this medieval-esque setting that we both talked about, and we just wanted to show it off. It felt like we were creating this whole city in our heads, and it's like, okay, but what is it? What happens? So that, I think, also came from there. It was this really interesting early evolution with making the game that we loved.
Yeah, you can definitely tell the inspirations, but then see how you've kind of gone off on different things, which I think is so cool. I love seeing, because I don't know if you've heard of Corpo Nation, that game. That's also inspired heavily by Papers, Please, but could not be more different games. So it's really interesting to see the different interpretations of different mechanics and how, it's so
Corpo
crazy.
Nation's so interesting because we saw them at PAX. We were just about a week ago basically, and kind of talked a little bit about that game. But there's such an interesting... That one really leans into the oppressive tone, but also with a very different kind of writing of humor. This sort of the raccoon vibe and just everything else there. So, but again, we do think Papers, Please like is kind of this interesting genre. You know, if you go really deep, there's a couple of other ones that have sort of done other reinterpretations. That's why, again, I think we think of that game, we thought of it as an early influence early on, but I think as we worked on it, we're like, okay, this is really kind of a genre piece of this particular thing. And we like different genres. I think the only one we'd never really be able to do professionally is horror, because we're both terrible cowards.
We're both chicken.
That's me too.
Okay, we're in good company. I love watching playthroughs. I just can't play it myself. Yeah. Like I've owned a bunch of them and I still can't play them.
So. Yeah, we love Corpo Nation. We really liked Death and Taxes. That's another one in sort of the same species of game. One that we really liked and played early is Valhalla, which is not spelled the way it sounds, but it's a
tactical bartender simulator.
Yeah. And then even cozy games like Coffee Talk, we feel like has a bit of the DNA in it. So anyway,
we looked at it early on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you said, seeing all these different kind of genres and subgenres and crossbreed genres come into existence at the moment it's a really good time to be in gaming, I think. So what was the inspiration for starting your own studio as opposed to just working in the industry or just composing music or just, you know, why did you choose to go down the indie route?
I think... Yeah, I think indie route was really specific because I think there's some of the most interesting stuff I think that's being made in video games. I sound, at risk of sounding like an auteur, I don't mean it that way. Like, just I think some of the more interesting experimental stuff is happening in indie games. So I think the first piece was, okay, we want to work on an indie game. And again, I think as I've said before, like, that contains multitudes. There's amazing developers who build something for 10 years and then ship it by themselves. There's teams of whatever. There's no magic cap for
like indie games can be a solo dev, and also Pal World is an indie game. So like it's a huge range.
I think the second piece was we really like working with teams. So the part of us that wasn't new was people who had both run teams and projects, and Scott had run big creative projects and I'd run big
tech projects.
Projects, basically, like an app designer. So, you know, you spend a lot of time thinking about, like, I give you something and most of the time the person's like licks it and doesn't use it the way you thought they would on the first go. And you're like, okay, I really thought we had it there. And then you kind of iterate. So we wanted to take everything we'd learned before from our previous careers and then kind of put it in there and then work with other people, which is one of the biggest things I'd say. The piece there was that just like the industry's full of, like, if there's ever such a thing as a non-hardworking game developer, I have not met them at any level. I don't know where you would find them. And so the other piece is just bringing in lots of other people. We love external opinions. We wanted that. So that was a lot of kind of that kind of stuff, I think, coming together. I don't know. What do you think?
I would say for our first outing, and I mean, we're now talking about our second and third game, which may look a little different. We wanted to be a studio and we wanted to work with a publisher on our first game because we want to learn. We want to keep learning. So that worked well for us just because working with a publisher, ideally, I hope for everyone, that then you get the benefit of some expert opinions, which was really helpful for Lil Guardsman. Why we started a studio? I think it's because we want to make stuff and we want to make the stuff we want to make. Yeah. And I think that suits both of us. I think... And like Artiom said, our whole team at the end of Lil Guardsman, there were 7.5 of us, and everybody's fingerprints are in every part of the game. Like Artiom and I aren't tyrants, but I think what makes Hilltop so cool is, for me anyway, is Artiom can't stop coming up with cool ideas, and neither can I. And those form into game-shaped ideas, and just like dreaming up games we want to make and games we want to play ourselves, games we want to make for other people to play is like the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's been really cool. But it's a good question. We haven't been asked that question before, so you get the gold star of a novel question from us.
It's interesting though, because like you both obviously have been successful. By the sounds of it, that's an assumption. So I apologize if I'm assuming wrong. But you sound like you had successful careers before this, so it's always interesting being like, okay, well, what made you decide to do something else, and especially something that could be seen as risky or, you know, a bit, you know, left of field, I guess.
Yeah, I think that one I can take some of the blame's the wrong word if you feel like it, but no, that's too far too. Somewhere between blame and credit, whatever that
responsibility is that the right?
Responsibility, sure. Yeah, I think like I'd started my own company before. It's also just kind of a thing I knew how to do. It felt like we could take that off the team's hands, if that makes sense. Like we could run it in a certain way. We could make decisions that, like, we're a fully remote team. We're recording right now from Scott's basement. It's something that kind of helped us have a structure that helps us work as a team. The gaming space can be very hard, and making games is very hard. And I think, when you get an opportunity to kind of treat everybody like adults, I have seen that they've always rise to the occasion. And so, we didn't crunch on Lil Guardsman when we were making it. We had a tougher year than the year before then, when we were just kind of in pre-production. We've played around with 4-day work weeks kind of when we can in the summers especially. So yeah, I think for us it seemed like less of a risk. Now that I think about it, no, it's a terrible risk. And that's totally true. I think it's almost two separate projects. Maybe that would be the way I would answer your question, is like, there's the project of making a good game. There's a project of making a good game successful, which unfortunately is not always perfectly related to making a good game. And I've seen great games that just don't get their moment. And stuff like this and streamers and players picking us up has been like a dream for us.
We love you, small streamers. You're our bread and butter.
I mean, it's like anytime you want to talk to us, please, we're available. And then there's running the studio. And I think they're just sort of three separate things, and there's more to it, but that was fun. It was fun for us. It was interesting for us, and it works for us. But it's a complicated thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I know we've already dived into a lot of the lore behind how Lil Guardsman started, but where did the initial kind of concept come from for the game?
There's a very unsexy answer to that, and I'm thinking back to one of the early bike rides, and we were literally thinking about our pipeline, and we were thinking about imagining a version where it was just 3 people, where it was me doing the writing and the sound, Artiom doing the art, and then a programmer. And we had 2 wonderful programmers who ended up working on the game, Italo and Adolfo. But we were literally thinking, okay, Artiom can do characters. Like Artiom can generate, like, we were dreaming about like 50 characters, 100 characters, and then thinking, okay, if we're doing this ourselves for not a lot of money, how can we reduce this to one location?
Yeah.
So instead of having to create many backgrounds, which again, there are many backgrounds in the game, we messed up. But that sort of was one of the, again, uncreative thoughts. But again, as soon as, like, I think anyone who works on creative projects would agree, like, as soon as you apply a constraint, that's what lets the imagination be unlocked, and sort of that fosters creativity. So like from there, we started dreaming up characters. And then after we sort of found Lil, which I'll let Artiom talk about, we found the game world. And then from there, sort of the story really flowed out of that. I would say some early things were, we liked the idea of doing fantasy, because we're both huge dorks. We wanted it to be funny, again, to capture the charm of those sort of early 90s adventure games. And yeah, and I think it's Artiom's. The ideas are very blurry at this point. We liked the idea of a sort of 70% classic fantasy world with 30% something else. Yeah. And in Lil Guardsman, that something else is sort of 70s, 80s, 90s technology. So it's fantasy. We don't have cars, and yet there's a CRT monitor above Lil, and that's never explained. Or like it's sort of battle axes meets fax machines. Yeah. And we found that early, and that sort of aesthetic and that design choice really helped us find the story.
Yeah, I think you have to want to make what you're making, which is silly to say, but I think a lot of the time our earlier discussions between Scott and I are like, do you want to make this? Is this resonating with you? So one of those pieces that my daughter had been born recently around the time we're working on Lil Guardsman, and so Lil is very heavily inspired by my daughter Jackie, and continues to be inspired like long after we kind of kept making it. But it's
the weird thing is, Jackie would have been 2 and a half when we started. So it was Artiom's thought experiment, I think, of imagining what his daughter would be like at 12. And it's funny that since the game's released, she has become more and more like Lil.
Yeah.
Like she is growing into the character
I didn't
you
tell
imagined.
you this, but a friend sent me a pair of shoes with Lil Guardsman branding on it. And Jackie just picked them up this morning or a couple of days ago. It was like, that's me, but you got the hair wrong. Like she has big puffy blonde hair, and Lil has red hair. And so, because we were kind of going with the blue tone.
She saw herself in these shoes.
Very much so. No hesitation or anything like that. So that was one piece, and then the I think mostly a lot of the stuff that I think we agree on this, but I don't want to speak for you. I think in this case, I'm still at that stage where I like making something familiar and then kind of finding a way to elevate it. And it's also kind of what I am like as a consumer of media of any kind. I kind of need a familiar footing to sort of go. So fantasy is one of those big ones, right? We all know elves and orcs and everything, and that's something that's changed over the last 50 years. But we don't need to spend a lot of time telling you about the lore of these characters.
We never have to do an exposition dump about like what is a goblin.
Yeah.
Like we just accept that the player gets what that is.
You kind of understand it. And so I think that was another piece that we thought about. Female lead was one of the bigger ones. The like parallel universe that existed for about 2.5 seconds is we were like, would it be funny if it's like an ogre who's manning the gate? And we're both like, no, that's so millennial Shrek of us if we went down that route. And we're like, no, it's not. It was like, again, one of those things just didn't resonate. And we're like, no, but we like these ones where it's like a young kid and a girl. It's fun. I think it kind of resonated with us immediately, and then we sort of were up and running and going that way.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you think that part of it, this might be a personal question, so feel free to skip it if it's too much, but do you think part of it as a parent, like having those kind of strong female leads was something you wanted to create for your daughter as well?
Oh, that's not a personal question. 100%. I will die on this hill. Like and probably knowing Twitter, I will have to eventually. No, because I remember asking early on with Scott. I was like, hey, how do we have there is stuff that has been created that's very bad leading female characters. And I was like, how do we avoid that? It was kind of a dumb writing question.
Or just to say that another way, where it feels like it's being shoehorned in, or where it's like...
Yeah, it just gives you the ick.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's the best way I put it. You see it and you're like, this is not working at all. And Scott was like, you just make a good character. And then they just happen to be a woman or a girl, whatever. And that sometimes gets missed. I think everyone's getting much better about it. There's much stronger writing around that space, but there was like a period where it didn't quite seem to work.
Where it was really broad tropes and really sort of lazy writing.
Yeah. And then I think, like my daughter's a big gamer and it's turning into one. It's not my intent. They're welcome to not enjoy this industry, but most kids do. And so, I think there's an excitement to her. I love that she sees a picture of Lil and is like, yeah, that's me. That's me, obviously. Like, not any doubt or question or anything else. I think that's always fun. And I think the writing team was really good about this, about sort of trying to do our best. We can always do better. I'm sure we messed up in some ways about kind of more underrepresented voices, more interesting conversations. We've gotten blasted for it a few times, which we take as like a point of pride. You get the first couple of reviews where they're like, "This is too woke for you," and you're like, "Oh, great! It's job accomplished."
It's not that woke, and also we the writers are a bunch of like theater artists from Canada. So sorry,
that's good.
Sorry, there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to button like Lil as a female lead, I think it came out of the Jackie inspiration, and then it was no big deal ever again. Like that was
we didn't really talk
we just
about
found
it
that character, and I don't think we were trying to make a point with it, but we just fell in love with her, and the core relationship between her and Hamish, who's her single father, like that's the heartbeat of the game, and I think there's something special about father-daughter relationships. Obviously. And again, if Lil had been a male character, it still would have worked. It would still be a cool game. But I think there's something even deeper and more resonant because that relationship is so like I think players get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So obviously you've talked about the theatre background. I'm also a theatre girl, so I have also done musicals.
I'll leave you two alone.
Yeah,
I can
you can leave.
I can go with the kids making drawings in the lunchroom, and we'll be over there ready for you guys when you're done talking about theater.
Beck, we'll schedule a second video where we can just be theater nerds together.
No, do it now. I'm not letting you off the hook. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
Yes, I'm also a theatre nerd, so I could definitely tell there was some heavy inspirations there. I was not surprised when you said you had a theatre background. I was going to ask about it if you didn't mention it anyway. So how do you think, like obviously I can tell that you've carried through a lot of these theatre kind of tropes and themes and things like that. So was that something that you did intentionally through the game?
Just to sort of take it back a layer, a rule we had in the game, which is so full of references. It is obnoxiously full of video game references, TV references, literary references, theater references. The rule was, especially because we knew it was going to be localized into simplified Chinese, German, and Spanish. So again, we're this game full of references that are definitely going to be lost in translation. Shout out to our localization team, who did an amazing job. Sorry, that sounded like a dig. They're amazing. Was that we could use references, but if someone didn't get the references, it still had to be funny, or it still had to make sense. Like
it still had to work as a puzzle. You have to be able to. I mean, there's some stuff I think that gets deeper, and we're still understanding how that works. But you had to be able to figure it out without getting the reference.
Because I think I imagine that a lot of folks have played those games that are super referential, super sort of meme oriented, and you hit those moments where you're like, I don't get this, and like I feel like the moment dies if you feel excluded by the content. So yeah, like we had a field day riffing and doing weird references, but I don't think that's the heart of the game. I think that's like a branch of the game. But in terms of the theater references, that was just me, Matt, and Jeremy trying to make each other laugh. And also, I think after a certain point, seeing how much we could get away with. There's a sequence in part 2 of the game. You meet Teeny Tom McGoblin, who is just so painfully Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol. Yeah. And if you do a specific path in his turn, it's just verbatim Christmas Carol. Yeah. Like, it's just, what day is this? It's Christmas Day. And then he goes and gets the fattest goose. And it makes no sense. So that's probably a moment we failed. That's probably a reference that's just so absurd.
Sometimes you have to please yourself. But again, talk about back to familiar and unfamiliar, Christmas Carol, if you're going to do a reference, that feels like it works.
Pretty universal. Yeah.
One thing I would say, again, Scott and I have been friends for 20 years. A lot of creative and kind of content overlap in terms of what we like, what we don't like, what we're comfortable sharing. Like, I'll take him along on a journey for a shooter. And I don't like musicals. I can't sit through a musical. I don't know if it's my ADHD, whatever it is.
This is me giving him the finger, so you don't have to blur it.
I was like, I'm not sure if you're allowed to swear, so I'm also not. Yeah, but the joke that came out of it, I think Scott pitched it. He was like, wouldn't it be funny if we have like a musical turn, which is like a thing in games too. There, in the Sierra games, there's like. In multiple Monkey Islands, there's a musical singing
Lucas
number.
Arts, not Sierra. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I don't want them. I don't want the angry adventure game mob to come.
You're right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, correct me. It's okay.
But yeah. In Curse of Monkey Island, the pirates sing "A Pirate I Was Meant to Be," which is a sort of a musical puzzle, which is the core inspiration. But then there's Stray Gods, which came out. That's a fully musical role-playing game that's really so cool. Brilliant. So yeah, it's not that original. I interrupted you.
No, just that. So Chloe came out of that. Yeah. It wasn't that Scott was trying to sort of shoehorn some reference to theater. Is that he was like, wouldn't it be funny in this game that you and I co-directing that you have a turn that is like one of the things you just can't seem to sit through. And Lil is you. Pitch perfect me. Yeah. Like she just every moment is like, why are you singing this? Can't you just say what you're saying?
Her line is a verbatim line Artiom said at the theater, which is this plot would go faster if there wasn't so much singing.
So that's another way that the reference kind of came into the game that we is pretty new. I don't know if that answers it.
And I mean, this is a bit of a segue, but a lot of the design decisions for Lil Guardsman came out of like, what are the resources we had available? Mm-hmm. So my background working in theater and working at Second City, which is a sort of comedy institution in North America in Toronto, we had access to all these actors. So for us to have it be fully voiced is something that was easily available to our studio because we have this great network of performers. Artiom does too. The voice of Chloe is my wife Tringa. So that was such a like it was easy to be like, okay, come downstairs and learn this song. Yeah. And when she did it, she had, I don't think she fully understood how it all fit together. She was like, okay, whatever. Like, can we get this done in an hour?
Yeah.
And now that she's played it, she's like, oh, I see what I was doing.
Yeah. Because you were like, why are you singing this weird, like, dissonant, story?
Her thing was, why am I singing this over and over? Like she didn't get sort of how the shape of the turn and the branching paths in the turn. So she's like, I've already sung this music. Why do I have to do it again? Yeah. I'm like, but that word's different.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I just to button it, we had so much fun nerding out in a million ways. And yeah, buried in Lil Guardsman is a love song to theater, for sure.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I get the impression the story was definitely came first before a lot of the gameplay. So how was that, like, that process of developing the story? And then, like I know you said before, sometimes you have the mechanics first and then you chuck in the story at the end. I feel like this game was the reverse of that.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that very quickly, and then I want Scott to talk about it because he ran the writers team. We didn't know what we didn't know. So if this ever worked out to be a really smart plan, we didn't plan it for it to be that way. But as we said, characters and story beats are really important to us. So I think we talked about that first. And then what happened was that the writing ended up leading the rest of the game, which largely is, that's not entirely true for a lot of games. It is for other ones. There is other examples out there. We're not the only ones who do it.
Yep.
But I think that, and that's also part of what I think the magic that works between Scott and I is that we, I tend to lead more on the mechanics side. He tends to lead more on the writing. And often it's kind of this give and take of like, hey, but I want to do this. This would be cool and interesting. It's like, oh, well, this would be a really cool story beat. Hold on, I think we can make this mechanical. And you kind of go back and forth. But with Lil Guardsman, I think, talk about that.
And I think the mechanic pull is also, is it fun?
Yeah.
So I'll be saying, okay, this plot is, this plot beat is so cool, and the tension there is Artiom being like, yeah, but how does it feel? How does it play? Is it clicky? Is it like, which again, it's our relationship is one that's full of tension. Like, it's constantly tension, but it's like the most like fun, cool tension, and it's all in the service of making things that people will love. So.
Yeah, and I think the other piece we brought into it was I really like tabletop role playing, and I think it's one of the more really interesting, dynamic places for storytelling right now. I think, especially with things like NADPOD and Adventure Time, kind of having started those ones, and a lot of new ones coming out all the time. It's really this idea of the fact that there is this active participant who is like sometimes derailing your story that you want to tell, and it's fun for them to do that. They like it, and so I think there's a kind of respect that you guys as a writing team held for that, where it's like, it's very easy, I think, to say, here's the story, I want to tell it, it's a great story, and unfortunately it's just not enough for a video game. That's a great setting for lots of other mediums. If that's your only kind of block, you might be able to pull it off, but you also might leave the player cold because you're like, well, just go to this place now, go to this place, and you're like, I feel railroaded.
Yeah, there are towering achievements in gaming where you are on a rail. Like, I'm thinking of walking simulators like What Remains of Edith Finch or Firewatch. Like you're sort of on a path. But we always wanted to let a player sort of define their own Lil. And ultimately, there is an A-plot in Lil Guardsman that happens no matter what, but there's lots of ways that you're sort of shaping the variables. So I hope that players feel like they're given the wheel enough.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, but again, I think just writing that was, you respected that so much right from the beginning when we started. It was this idea of like, okay, so it's got to be fun. Like, we're willing to change stuff. We're willing to change beats in the story and key kind of pacing questions to change that. Yeah. So that was a big one. Yeah, it was a great experiment. I think we learned a lot from it, and I think we're going to continue to implement it in all of our games. Like, it's something where we're working on this RPG right now, and it's the same thing. It's like, what's the setting and what's the story and the character beats and who are they?
And that's a good segue. So in game development typically, and I think for us, in order to pitch a game, you need to create something playable. You need to create a playable prototype all the way up to a vertical slice, and a vertical slice is a small chunk of your game that reflects the full commercial, like the art and sort of every aspect reflects what the final game will be. So we created a prototype that I played again recently, and it's not that far off. It's rough around the edges in every way, but it's still our game.
But the characters carried over, like the...
Exactly. We figured out sort of some key characters, we figured out some things about the world, and we had a rough outline of a plot. And a lot of that outline got thrown out. But I'd say we built the slice and we had an idea of it. We thankfully went into production and we started sort of solidifying the outline. But and that's when the programming and the design kicked in. And that's where it really became the give and take that Artiom is talking about. Where it's like the story's getting clearer, but then when it would bump up against something that mechanically wasn't good, we as the writers would be like, okay, we'll pivot, we'll do something else. And I'd say the biggest change, and Lil Guardsman is about an 8-hour game. On Steam, we're seeing people who have played it for 10 hours, 15 hours, some crazy people who we love, who've played it for 25 hours, which I don't, they've seen everything in the game. But there was originally a third act. So right now there's a first act and second act, and then you get to the ending. We had an idea for a third act, and a lot of those things sort of went into part two. But yeah, I mean, it's in game development, I think we talk about holding things loosely.
Yep.
So in my head, we had part one, part two, part three. The timeline is the biggest reality. Like, time was running out. So it's like, okay, how do we not kill our timeline and run out of money? So it's like, okay, so we'll tell the best story in 2 parts instead of 3 parts. Save some of that third part for DLC or sequel. But yeah, it's a creative medium, but it's also you have to be practical and pragmatic, and you have to be hyper flexible, and it's a team sport. If I had been monstrous, as the sort of narrative director, if I had like put my foot down, I would have killed the project.
There's so many ways to do it.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Cool, that's so interesting. So pretty much the characters were what really kicked it off, and then everything else came after that.
The characters in this setting, and I think those really predicated the story.
Yeah,
I think it was this sort of setup of there's Lil, there's her sort of well-intentioned but inept dad.
It's a real Lisa Homer Simpson dynamic.
We often talked about that early on. And then there's kind of the sprawl and what's going to be happening to the city. That kind of got set early on, and I think then it was a question of, well, how to tell that story. Yeah. And then a lot of happy accidents. I think, like an early drawing of as Scott has alluded, like I did a lot of the early concept art for the game and the final art for a vertical slice. Yeah. And then Hoffa and Bruno.
Just to be explicit, in the playable prototype that we pitched with, every visual asset was yours.
Yeah. And then we were really lucky to be joined by Hoffa and Bruno, who are these 2 super talented artists. Hoffa kind of leaning a little bit more towards doing the characters, Bruno doing a little bit more of the backgrounds, but they shared. They shared and they've collaborated before. Hey guys, I hope you're listening to this. And so then what happened was, I think by the end of the game, especially if you took a step back from the process, you could sort of see just everybody kind of just having a really fun time jamming together. So we would like sometimes use like, basically PNG art to be like, oh, this is what we're looking at, or sometimes I'd make a sketch. And then by the end, like Scott would just describe a character and then they'd be there in like 2 minutes, feels like. And something's like, oh, well, this is great. Let's do this with them, and here's what we can do. So it's a lot of it kind of following the natural energy of the game and the fun in it to kind of a really good conclusion.
And I think what you just described, this like game of the writers wanting to delight the artists and then the artists wanting to delight the writers, like it was this good volleyball. Yeah. I'd say in terms of just going back to story for a second, early on we liked the idea of the like subverting the power fantasy that's typical in games, especially in fantasy games. Lil is not a chosen one. It's not a power progression. We like the idea of, okay, this like you're a kid stuck doing an adult's job, which is funny to us, but the idea that there's this epic story playing out around you that you participate in, but you are not a powerful character. Yeah. So instead of being the warrior or the mage or the thief that progresses, like you're just a normal kid. And how interesting and how funny is it if you're making all these micro choices at the gate that are having these like ripple effects? So I think one of the most satisfying moments in the game is, again, there's a couple of points that you're nudging the story, and then suddenly you're at war, and you're at war with like based on a player choice.
Yeah.
Again, without participating in the war, without being a powerful character. And I think hopefully what's resonating with people is just how normal Lil is. And hopefully people are able to really put themselves in that character either as a kid or, I mean, she's so sarcastic that I think you sometimes forget that you're playing as a kid. But yeah, it's what happens if you put a normal person in a outrageous, fantastical environment.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's such a cool concept. So you've talked a little bit about team dynamics, and it obviously sounds like a whole lot of fun on your team. But how is it working as a team compared to, like, I know we see a lot of solo devs. So how was the experience as a team for you developing the game?
I think for us, we like lots of time to be able to work on stuff, and so just kind of get your head down. Like, I think, speaking as like an illustrator, a lot of it is just kind of hunched over your tablet and kind of drawing, and then sharing that early especially as you build trust. I think trust is something we talk about often with the team of, like, have we built enough trust with each other? Do we trust each other to make these decisions? Do they trust us to kind of lead it and do all this stuff? And that was a kind of very interesting dynamic that was important to us. And then just talking, I mean, I know that's a boring answer, I'm sorry, but like a lot of it is kind of putting your game out there early, seeing what the response is. If you feel a ways about it, I don't think I've ever met a dev that doesn't at least in some way feel about something they create, obviously. So you feel what you feel about it, and then kind of try to hear the feedback. Players are exceptionally good at telling you if they're not having fun. Which is also true of, by the way, of products. Like people will tell you if they don't enjoy using something. The trick then is to kind of figure out how to solve, like, you have it in your hands to like solve their entire problem for gaming. I cannot do for anything else, unfortunately. But like you can if they're just like, I'm not enjoying this, you can sit down and, I think with a good team, say, okay, they're not enjoying this part. What's happening? Something early on in the game that we tried out. I think there was somebody on Twitter who actually commented on it and had said...
And they wanted the original.
Yeah, they wanted the original. So I'm sorry, I don't know your name out there, person on the internet, but if you ever listen to this...
Can I preface it, or do you mind?
Yeah, do it. Set up the story.
Because it was my thought that got shot down. So that's why I want to offer it for sacrifice. Originally, we liked the idea that you're making these choices, you're moving, and that the consequences of your actions would be invisible until much later. So you're doing something in level 1, and then in level 4, something is different because of what you've done, and it would be very sort of hidden and behind the game, and maybe it would be discovered later if you're talking to your friend. Oh, did you see that? No, I didn't see that. I feel like that's a little bit the Disco Elysium model, which is like, I feel like players have no idea what they're not seeing. But because there's sort of a sort of quicker puzzle loop in ours, that wasn't working. So if you want to pick it up. And
so what we found was we tried it. I think it's a really solid idea because it's fun to feel like you're shaping the world. I think that still sits inside the game really clearly. But what happened was, even if you take something like the entire day that you play through as Lil, you kind of see about 6 to 10 characters, usually about like 7 or so. And you make a decision, and even getting to the end of the day just had this kind of indescribable splashiness to it. Like, it's like driving a car that where the wheel's not quite right. Because you're like, I'm making decisions. I can tell something's responding. You're making decisions, but you can't quite see what's going on. And so we pulled forward a lot of the star reviews right as you make it, because the immediate response and satisfaction and kind of responsiveness. And again, I'm sure there's players for whom it doesn't work. So, a game made for everybody is made for no one is something we try to talk about. And like, it's just not a smart idea from a design perspective.
So what we ended up adding was, after every turn, you get sort of a result for that individual turn.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the guard shift, you get those all add up. And something that I fought Artiom on, and he was so right about, was when you do make a decision that has an effect somewhere in the sprawl that shapes something, there's a little pop-up. And the industry term I've heard is it's a Clementine. So Clementine is one of the characters from The Walking Dead. Yeah. And in the Telltale game, it's Clementine will remember this. Yeah. Blank will remember this.
Yeah.
So I think adding these, like, after you make choices, you get an immediate payoff. And some of it is still invisible. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to change.
You might not know that you've made a decision about the war or anything. I don't want to spoil stuff.
But that was a initial design thing, which is, again, the idea that it would be obscure and only later would you figure it out, versus the need to, like, give the player an endorphin hit really quickly.
Yeah, to give them that feedback. But again, that's one of the things I talked about early on is, like, that's what's so fun about games, is because you can have that discussion, you can have that thesis, and then if you kind of push through the pain a little bit, or pain for me at least, I don't know, I can't speak to other developers.
The pain of feedback?
Yeah, you get it in front of some people. It doesn't have to be a very large group. You kind of go, I thought that was funny, or I thought that was gonna work, and it usually doesn't. I think no matter of your seniority in gaming, no one has 100% hit rate on calling those things, and then you just have to kind of listen. And again, people will tell you their problems, and then you can make solutions for them. But they give you feedback, and what's great about players is that they have that immediacy. Everyone almost does. You kind of know when something's working. You don't need to prod to get it.
But pulling it back to your question, I love that we're going in fun directions from these.
I hope it's working for you. It's who we are.
But no, we had a small team. It started at 3 and then grew up to sort of 7 plus. Like our voice cast and stuff makes that number bigger. But yeah, I think we got very lucky. I think we also knew what we needed, but we just had a group of folks who really loved what we were making. And yeah, I mean, I'm really proud that everyone who started the project finished the project. Like, there was no attrition. We didn't lose anybody.
Even with a baby born.
And I will say, I haven't looked at it in a while. I haven't looked at the credits, but a lot of people on the team are listed as game designer, in addition to their primary task, because good ideas came from everywhere, and that felt right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So what were some of the challenges that you faced when making the game?
I mean, time's your biggest enemy on a game. It can also be your biggest friend. I think there was a piece by Strange Scaffold. He was tweeting this morning. So we're talking about the fact that, because they're working on a game that was like about 9 months of production, which is still something I'm not sure Crazy. I can totally wrap my head around. But I think making a game under 2 years is like a fun challenge. I think
Lil Guardsman's production for folks was 18 months.
Yeah, it was about 18 months to do it. And there was pre-production before then, but where you kind of let the idea cook. But that was like the biggest challenge, I think, for us. I'll tell you what, to confess a secret, one of the biggest early fears that Scott and I had early on was that the game wouldn't be long enough, which is like ludicrous. Like, now completely not an issue unless you're looking for a 30-hour game.
Oh God, is it going to be 4 hours? Is it going to be
2 hours? Can you beat this thing? And then you kind of played the first version, but just to say, like, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. The very first biggest fear we had was that the game just wouldn't be long enough. Yeah. It wouldn't be that kind of sweet spot of 6 to 8 hours. And that was, again, totally wrong. Just completely couldn't be farther from the truth. So
I'd say one of the hardest things that I think we're good at is, and Artiom was just talking about this, was receiving critical feedback. And for me, as a bit of a sensitive Sally, not internalizing the feedback, not hearing it as a personal critique, and trying to frame it as, no, these opinions are all in the service of making the game the best. So yeah, there was a period sort of smack dab in the middle of production where it was good. Lots of things were working, but there were some things that were profoundly not working. And that's where that's where we started getting it to player testers and started getting feedback. And again, it was amazing. And that feedback is what made the game good. But yeah, I think there's an art to receiving feedback and not internalizing it.
Yeah, which I think is like, that's a universal thing that anybody who does creative work, I think, has to struggle with, contend with. And I think, one of our lessons was, I thought we kind of got the build out pretty soon. And I think for the next game, we'll do it sooner. Yeah. Just to get that feedback. That's where also, again, I said this before, a game made for everybody is made for no one. You also kind of learn your audience a little bit. This is like, we talked about this very early, but cozy gaming community has received Lil very well, and we love it. And it's something that I don't think we would have called early on. It definitely was an influence, but I don't know, we don't know what you've written until people read it. Like, we don't know how it would land. So that's just something, I think that was the big real one that we dealt with, is just getting out there early, getting the feedback, dealing with really productive, interesting criticism, and then making the product, making the game better as a result.
The last thing that I would say is hard, and I think this is a bit of a truism, is when you're making something, when you're writing something, you will get to a point where you're like, this is shit, I hate this is terrible, I should stop. And it's like pushing through that feeling, because I think that's just something that you encounter, and it's collaborative, so people will make your stuff better, but it's working through that inevitable phase of, is this good?
We refer to that as like, you stop tasting the lemonade because you're just like too sour, too sugary, and then by the end your tongue's burned off.
Your taste buds are dead.
And so you must remember your first reaction.
Yeah.
Like when you finish making something and you see it for the first time, I mean, I hope I don't lose this, but like I get really excited about the games we make, and then I want to play them. That's kind of a test that I do have in myself. I think I want multiple people to do that. But then like by the 50th, 90th, 100th playthrough, I don't even know how many playthroughs that Scott has done. He shoulders that to some degree. Like you're going to lose that, and we lost that, and then you have to go, okay, but remember the first time we played it, how good it was? Yeah. That was another one. So one wrong one, and two that we still struggle with, probably will continue to struggle with as long as the industry will let us keep making games.
Now, you mentioned the surprise of it being accepted, I guess, into the cozy gaming space. So that was not intended?
I think during production, and because of some of our partners on the publishing team who are way into cozy games, that's Reza and Lauren, who are both on the community team, who are very involved in the cozy community. They called it early, but they also called that it's not quite a cozy game, or it's a cozy game to a certain cozy player. I mean, it's funny. I've read about how, like, to some people Skyrim is a cozy game because its vibe is so bucolic and beautiful, but you're also like fighting hordes of Draugr and stuff.
The theory that we have, and I am to some degree a cozy gamer. Like, I'm a big Stardew Valley boy, and I have multiple playthroughs that I've done on multiple devices. Yeah. That's how far I've gotten there. The thing is, like, I don't think we have a total answer. It's still something we get to have fun discovering as we have these interviews. But, like, I think mechanically my theory is that, like, cozy games are engaging but not stimulating, to the degree that, like, a horror game is very stimulating. It could be kind of even not particularly engaging mechanically, and that's part of the fun. But it's like it grabs you by the collar and just is like, you got to listen to me. The piece where I think I see our game kind of deviate from a cozy game is that we still have, plot hooks and beats and milestones, and so we're gonna hit you with drama. Like, that's part of storytelling.
I'd say mechanically it is very cozy. Mechanically it is it doesn't require reflexes or like a twitch sort of style of gaming. We were very deliberate in the Chronometer 3000, which is the rewind mechanic, that it's very gentle in terms of exploration and playing at your own pace. But the writing team, we were not willing to sacrifice dramatic storytelling and having dramatic stakes and like, but again, in thinking about like cozy versus not, we have game overs. We have scenarios, usually for jokes, where Lil can die. If you piss off Chloe, she throws a Molotov cocktail at you, and you get a game over.
It happens in a bunch of places.
But it's cozy because the game over isn't punishing. The game over bumps you right back to where you were. So it's not aggressive, but it's interesting because there's a cozy creator that I really like. And she would say she loves 2/3 of the game. She loves the game until you go to war. And then at that point, the theme and the plot goes beyond sort of her preference and her threshold for what is a good cozy game. And that's totally fair.
Yeah, which is like legitimate. Like, I think, again, going back to Stardew Valley, because it's just, I think, something everybody will recognize. You have the setup, which I think is like beautiful. I think what's one of the best, like, timeless setups. Like, you are leaving behind this kind of difficult world. Don't we all relate to that a little bit to some degree? And then you get this break, you move out of the city, you got the farm, you meet people, you can romance them. But you know, there's not like divorce in the story or like characters dramatically killed and you're like trying to uncover stuff. It never goes into that territory, and I think that's like a perfect example of and they're still fighting in the game. You can go, you know, you can go in the dungeon when you're mining. Like there is a little bit of engagement, but again, I think it's where that's where you kind of let the player go with the story, because the main lead is you. I think it's at least how I play it. Whereas the main lead in Lil Guardsman is Lil, and she will kind of
who is a named character with a personality with traits. Yeah.
So anyway, I'll just say I think it's just like if you're a cozy gamer and you've wondered whether we ever thought about you, yeah, a lot, and we still do. This is like a recurring discussion we have because we love how much it's resonated, and we want to understand where it works for you, where it breaks down, why do you feel that? Because I think cozy gaming is those big underappreciated spaces in gaming. Next to only I'd say like women in gaming, that's the other one that I feel like still, even with everything that's changed, like that's 50% of gamers flat. That's not debatable anymore. That's a real number that's been proven. And yet a lot of the time there's still kind of this tie to like the 2010s, like, you know, console era where it was like more 16, 18-year-old boys. And so, yeah, I think it's an amazing genre and space, and we're kind of happy we hit it and we're able to connect with it. And we thought about it, but we weren't intending to fully. We at the beginning of production we didn't say we are making a cozy game.
Yeah.
I think we happened to make a cozy game, and we're delighted by it.
Yeah. I think my experience of it, I think it was back even in the demo, and I was like playing along, you know, oh yeah, this is cool. And then I think I got to the game show scene and pissed off the wrong person and died. And I was like, oh, okay, it's not a cozy game totally. Like there's cozy elements, but this like packs a punch as well. And I think that's what made me love it, to be honest, because I love a bit of chaos.
I think that was a lot of Scott's writing. Like we wanted to have that kind of really fun spontaneity, I think maybe is another word that kind of sometimes works in cozy gaming, sometimes doesn't.
Yep.
And then again, we keep you rolling. Like if you've hit a reload screen, we kind of messed up as developers. The intent was always you make that choice, we roll you right through it, and then you're back again, and you kind of like, whoa, that was a really fun detour.
Yeah.
And like our game is rated teen because of like there's some adult situations, like again, all played for jokes. It's all the humor is mature, but it's like we wanted it to feel like a cartoon. We wanted it to feel like a cartoon, and not for little kids, but like the cartoons that we loved in the 90s and early 2000s. Sorry to age us.
No, it's like,
but yeah, we wanted it to, even at its most dark and its most violent, for it to feel like it would fit into a cartoon.
Yeah. That was a big inspiration as well.
So we've talked a little bit about challenges, but what were some of the highlights of the development period?
Oh, interesting.
I'd say it was mostly a highlight. And I feel like we're really blessed for that to be true. Like we're all still speaking to each other. We're all like anxious to work on the next thing together. So I think that's kind of rare.
Yeah, I think on the production side, there's a couple of peaks you'll always hit, and then a couple of peaks that we were surprised by. The first peak it's again, I don't know. Other devs can tweet at me, but we were just at GDC, so you should have told me. Like, one of the peaks you hit is when you first have a vision for something, it starts to coalesce, you kind of baked it enough that it's actually okay, it can support it, and then you all make stuff together, and you get the first couple of levels done, and it like, you know, it looks sometimes kind of crappy because maybe the UI is done, or at least a lot of stuff is still in gray box, but it starts to work. That is great every time. I think you... like
when things click,
when things kind of click for the first time, you have that first like kind of sense, okay, well this could work, you know. I don't know if it's like a musician, like I don't know whether it's like finding enough things that are working together where it's like it's not the whole song, but okay, you got the hook written or whatever it is that you're working on. So there's that piece, and then there's kind of the trough of sorrow of, you know, some of it's working, but is enough working? You can't give somebody a game and be like, unless you're real auteur, but like 60% works and you'll figure out the rest. Like you have to kind of work through that. And then there's a second peak where you kind of have the like, oh, this is what it is. Okay, now we've really gotten some people in the room. Now we've really gotten some good ideas out. Now we really know what we're making. And then there's kind of the sprint towards the end, and it gets harder with longer games and more mechanically driven games and balancing and all this other stuff. But I think for me, those were the two. Like I kind of always want to make sure that we expect to hit the first one. And then I think know that we're prepared for the second one, to know that like, yeah, okay, so some of it's going to work. And that's where you kind of find your genre and audience and a bunch of other stuff as you go through.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say for me, the most joyful moment in production was when we started to get the voice acting in.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was a big one, actually. Yeah, I forgot about that. You're right.
Our game is beautiful because our artists are amazing, but it's pretty low in terms of animation. We made a choice early on that just because our team was small and knowing that classic animation takes a long time, that it would be a lot of sort of killer illustrations, but not a lot of animation. And our thesis was, okay, if we do fully voiced, that's going to really bring it to life, and that's going to make like it really does something. It really makes it feel like there's more motion, more life on screen.
Well, I can speak to that because like we had a fear that, like, to be very blunt, we could either give you 10 animated characters or 100 non-animated characters. So that kind of is a big decision about what the game is.
And there was definitely a moment early on where Artiom had to like, he's like, patted me on the shoulder, called me Slugger. He's like, listen, Slugger. What you're picturing in terms of the degree of animation is just like we just can't.
You know, you animate on you animate on twos, and it's like, you know, a couple of seconds of animation is going to kill all of us.
Yeah.
But we did have a big. I was going to see if you remember this. Remember the debate about blinking?
Yes.
So there was one question, which was, do we put blinking into the game?
Yeah.
Because that would kind of keep the characters alive. And I think where, you know, you don't know right until the end, but when the voice came in, you totally, your brain does something.
Yeah.
It just goes, oh, okay, this is a real person. And we forgot it, but we sweated it for so much of the development, being like, is this, like, we have the little bounce on the character, everything else, but we were so worried that we were going to lose the illusion of immersion, because we're like, they're just static. They're static the whole time. We got 100 of them. I mean, I'm not even sure how we managed to finish 100, even with the team that they have.
Yeah,
you know,
it was a sprint to the finish. But yeah, like it, in so many ways, adding the voice layer, which comes very late in the process, was a confirmation that it like feels alive. And having great comics deliver your text, it's like, oh, it's funny. Like we weren't really worried because Matt and Jeremy, my co-writers, are both actors themselves. Jeremy voices a couple characters, but he's the voice of Malcolm, who's I think is amazing as the voice of Malcolm. Matt doesn't voice as many characters, but he's all of the radio announcer voices because he's just got this great like old-timey radio voice. Yep. So the three of us would read the turns and sort of virtually play the turns. So Artiom would have the script, and we'd make him like, you can do 3 things per turn. We'd be like, okay, Artiom, let's try it. Make some choices.
Which, if it sounds awkward, it is.
It was very
awkward. I
want
you to know, you don't have anything in front of you. It's just 3 people that are then reacting to a choice you're making, which is exciting but weird.
Yeah. But it's
a great way to read what you're doing, actually.
But then to hear the 14 voice actors' voices bring the cast to life, that was definitely the most fun part.
That would be my choice. I think that's the biggest highlight.
Yeah, that's so cool. The lead up to launch and releasing the game, what was that process like?
It was interesting. I mean, the industry is going through a big spasm, went through a big spasm last year. December, we were originally thinking about releasing the game back in December. And that
we got good advice and good coaching from our publisher that like okay, here's some behind the scenes. We finished production on our end basically end of September.
Wow.
And the game was released in January. That didn't include final QA, so it was still being QA'd, and the porting team was wrapping up.
I think it's safe to say like we were basically done and shipped and ready to go kind of like November.
Yes, so if we had sprinted, we could have released in November or December. But basically it was like, well, you're going to get clobbered. If you release in November, December, based on what else is coming out, based on the focus on sort of end of the year, not so much new things. And the strategy from Versus Evil at that point was, no, the release calendar is lighter in January. So our game is small, our team is small. It'll be more visible then. So it was very interesting at the end. We were supporting the team and the sort of like the QA team and the porting team, but that creatively we wrapped much earlier.
Yeah, and it was there was a lot of stuff happening. I'll talk about it in a second, but I think, for us personally, I think it's just as creators, you're kind of anxious to get it out there. You're done. We often use the adage of like all art is abandoned, never finished, and so you sort of rest it out of your hands, put it down, go, okay, it's done. It's very tempting to keep going with it. There's a few patches, like the small things we fixed in the game, but that was kind of like a thing we have to be patient about. And then, it's a matter of public record now, but like our publisher, Versus Evil, shut down a couple of days before Christmas. It was sort of this, this is a volatile industry, so it was these really bad circumstances where they were shut down. And, we moved over to Tiny Build, and the team there has been really nice to us and got the game shipped out. But that was also hard to see. We lived the volatility that everybody lived because, I think last year they said I'm sorry if I'm wrong, I think it was about 15,000 people had been fired in the industry. Yeah. So
we were a little bit clobbered by that. Yeah, and it was hard because the folks that had been sort of driving us to launch had that happen to them. Mm-hmm. And the game came out and the game was released and we're grateful and thankful that it happened. But I mean, I'd say Lil Guardsman is a pretty interesting case study that's kind of emblematic of the challenges facing a lot of indie projects right now.
Yeah, and I think, speaking more broadly about just creating things, like that's why I said early on, there's the act of making something good, there's the act of making a good game, whatever that is, obviously could be debated.
That's subjective, yeah.
Yeah, and you hope it resonates. And then you're kind of the act of trying to make your good game successful, and I think something that I see with a lot of, especially, I was guilty of this, but also like anybody coming in fresh into the industry, there's this kind of hope that a good game will then sell itself. Mm-hmm. And
the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come.
God, I wish that was true.
Yeah.
I mean, and there is cases that it is true, but often it's not. And there's a lot of games that kind of come out and just don't hit the right timing, and that's also unfortunate. So it was a volatile thing that we went through, and then also, we sold out most of our wish list in the first couple of weeks, and that was like, whoa, okay, so there's a lot of people who want to play this.
Yeah.
They're really into this game, they really like it, and that's one of the best feelings in the world.
And I will say that if you engage with Hilltop or Lil Guardsman's social media, you're engaging with me. Hi, nice to meet you. It's because our game came out under sort of different circumstances, to be diplomatic. It's been amazing to watch streamers run with it, small streamers and a couple of big streamers who have found it organically, and to watch the people who love it, the people who it resonates with, like sort of like yell from the rooftops about how good it is. So yeah, it's like it isn't slowing down. Or I feel really grateful that people are still finding our game now 2 months after launch. Yeah. And just to button the question about like the stress of launch, we are so grateful to everyone who helped us get to this point. So the Versus Evil folks, and then also the folks who supported the game beyond that. So after Versus Evil, after we moved to Tiny Build, the people on the Tiny Build side who supported the launch, we're grateful to them too.
And now that it's out, how does it feel?
Great. I mean, I was thinking more about what you asked about, like what are the big, really kind of pleasant surprises. One of them was I've streamed before very lightly. It was for a tabletop RPG thing that I was working on, and I wasn't streaming as myself, which I don't do. It was streaming as them, and I liked it. That was interesting. It's not really the kind of I struggle to be able to manage a chat and do something. I just get kind of distracted. So, but I remember coming back to the game and I was like, this is gonna work really well with streamers. Like this feels almost immediately like something that it's a game you can pause in the middle, you can talk, it talks back at you if you want. And then Scott kind of yes-anded me on that very strongly, so did the devs, and kind of put in a bunch of features for streamers. So cool. Like just seeing that and then seeing it resonate with them and having them share it and do it. And that's all been organic. Like we didn't get an opportunity to sort of have a big creator launch, which we still kind of, I think about in the long term for the game. But that's been really, really cool. I don't know what else. Average playtime is really fun to see. I don't know. Sorry, that's very nerdy, but like it is very fun to see that most people are playing a good 5 hours of the game, no matter how they buy it.
Yeah, and that the people who are reviewing it on Steam, which is so helpful to us, seeing again 10 plus hours played in the game. So it's like that's not just the base experience. That's people who are poking around and exploring.
Yeah. Oh, we were talking about this at GDC. for some reason, Ash and Lieutenant Stryker keep getting...
Who are the two royal advisors, and for those who haven't played the game, Lieutenant Stryker is in armor, and she's a very, like, badass butch...
Kind of a Brienne of Tarth was the... I drew the early concept art, so that was I was looking at that when I was drawing it.
And Councilwoman Ash is this very Machiavellian, sort of conniving, like politician type.
Yeah.
And they're both badass female characters.
And they keep getting shipped as a couple, which I just find to be the funniest,
I can see that.
most delightful. And it's hit like people now draw like art of it, and it really
fan
works
art
for me.
Yeah.
I really like it. There's other fan art, but that's the one. If you want to know what I was like truly delighted by, even on a weekend when I saw it, I was like, oh my god, this is so... Totally had no prediction for that. So that was really cool.
In terms of launch, we are so proud to have gotten a good critical response. Mm-hmm. I mean, that you have no idea how critics are going to receive it. So the fact that we've gotten a lot of really positive reviews is very edifying. And yeah, like I said, it's the players who like it really like it. That there are a lot of people who love our game, and my wish for it is just that it keeps rolling. Like right now, I think there are so many more players who would love our game that have never heard of it. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that those people hear of it, and we're working on ways to do that.
Yeah, and then otherwise I'd say, like, again, I've been the writer to game teams who says, hey, this worked for me, or I just wanted to tell you I really enjoyed it. I know that we do read those.
We read everything.
We're slightly behind right now because we are a small team, so people email us all the time, and we do read them, actually. We can't respond to every single one, but we do go through them because, again, to us it's meaningful, and often there's a kind of interesting suggestion in there, or this, if you're telling us about something that's not working, again, don't know if we can always address it, but we do hear you, actually. We for us at least, I can't speak for other devs, like, it's cool. It's really interesting. We appreciate the outreach and the interest and the fact that you cared enough to, play and then talk about the game afterwards.
And I don't know what's in the cards, but the fact that there are people who want more, is really cool.
Very cool. Very satisfying.
Yeah, and the idea of is there more story to tell in this world? We definitely think so. Yeah.
That was literally going to be my next question. What's next? Have we got more Lil on the cards, or more in the same world?
I think there's still more storytelling to be had about just Lil and Hamish as a relationship. We have talked about a DLC. That's not a decision we get to make ourselves.
That's in the hands of our publisher.
But I think that's something we'd love to do, and we like the idea of sort of kind of a complete edition that sort of fills a few things out. I mean, you guys wrote so much. Are you okay writing more?
Yeah, no, I think there is an appetite. It's interesting because Artiom and I we're out pitching our second game, which has nothing to do with Lil and is very tonally different from Lil Guardsman. Though I think it builds on a lot of the strengths and the learnings from Lil Guardsman. But no, I think time will tell. Like we can't announce anything here, and also there's nothing to announce right now. But yeah, I think it's tough to release a game that people tell you is good and that reviewers tell you is good and not want to keep going with it. And I think because if you've played Lil Guardsman, there's what you see and you play, but there's so much writing that suggests what else is happening in this world. So there's so much fertile soil that we'd love to use a cozy farming sim metaphor. Yeah, there's more soil to till there. I hated myself for that.
Listen, not every draft can be perfect.
No, exactly.
That's okay.
Exactly.
We often use the term vomit draft for the first version you write.
So you just experienced that. Congratulations.
You just do that. But yeah, that was very cool. It's very, very cool, very satisfying. And I think, there's some elements of, we think the place could be carried over to more animation would be really cool. That was an intent of ours. But those things are so, kind of a question of timing and everything else. We're going to work hard to trying to see if there's an opportunity there. But we want to continue with it, I guess is the general point.
And there's things that we would be interested in pursuing with the base game. There's great conversations I'm having with folks online about how to make the game more accessible. That is something that if more development is greenlit, that's something that we would certainly pursue. And then we were lucky to release on Steam and all the consoles. Where else could it go? That's a question that we're thinking about.
Yeah, cool. And you have mentioned that you have some other projects in the pipeline. So what is that looking like? I mean, obviously you probably can't tell me too much, but there's other stuff in the works.
We can talk about it a little bit.
Yep.
I think we need to be enigmatic and mysterious about it.
The only thing I'd say is I think what we're thinking about now is we'd love for people to look back and see 5-6 games from Scott and I that, like, if bundled together, are very different in terms of tastes. You know, not to overquote a kind of massive success in the space, but like Supergiant does that very well. You know, you buy Bastion and then you get Hades, and those are two very different flavors, and then there's a kind of shared DNA.
Yeah, and there's some shared sensibilities, even though the genre feels very different. Like, like we're genre omnivores.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness for Xbox Game Pass, so I can just try everything. But yeah, I think we'd be excited to do more Lil Guardsman or more sort of pure narrative games, but next we're going in different directions.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much what we can say right now. But you know, if people keep poking us, we'll talk about it soon.
Oh, that's so exciting. I always love seeing what comes next after something like that you've worked on so hard. It's like, okay, but what are they going to do next? I think it's always really cool. Okay, lucky last question. What advice would you give to anyone else in the indie game space working on their own projects at the moment?
I think the biggest advice, I have two pieces of advice. Something that is very hard to hold on to is that you should want to make what you're making, which is weird, and you hear that actually across both studios and publishers. They will also say that sometimes they feel like they're getting pitched, and it's a big industry, and there's a kind of overload of studios and few publishers, so I don't know what that does, but they will say like they're getting pitched kind of just a popular genre or everything else.
Yeah, just to jump in, there's a discourse that I see in a lot of sort of like indie dev Facebook groups and people coming at it from, I want to build a game in a genre that I can sell, which is not that's just good business.
We think about that all the time ourselves. Like, but it's not wrong.
But good feedback we've heard from our publisher and other publishers that we have relationships with is how clear it is that we're passionate about what we're doing and how much we love what we're making.
Yeah, and I think to use an example from way back in the day, I think, like I said, Scott and I are genre omnivores, and we're going to create lots of different stuff, I think, if we have it our way. There's almost no chance we'd ever do a classic 4X strategy game, because I know that through the production cycle, I would enjoy parts of that. I also kind of feel like, well, what's the story? Which is something that sort of throws me out of there eventually, and you'd hate it, and I think that's normal.
Not my genre.
Yeah, like and just you wouldn't enjoy working on it. So I think there is an element of, so you have to have that, and then on the other hand is just I think I've said this before already, but like you have to get it out there. I think that's maybe the biggest thing. I've been lucky to kind of talk to some other developers, especially like single team ones. And the consistent thing that I want them to know that I fear personally and push through it is to get it out there, to eventually sort of get it in front of an audience. Once you kind of know what it is, you'll know that, it's very hard to describe when that right time is, but to probably do it a little bit before you think you're ready, would be a pretty good measure. And then to hear their feedback as I think kind of direct or indirect kindness that it is, because they care, they're looking at something, they're trying to tell you what they like, they don't like. Everyone has taste. Not everybody knows how to maybe design from it, but everyone has taste about what they like.
I think I pulled it in from theater. It's when you're receiving notes, like dramaturgical notes, like you've written a play, the questions are valuable, but the solutions maybe not, are maybe not valuable. So if someone says this isn't working or this doesn't make sense to me, hear that, but take the and here's how you should fix it with a big grain of salt.
Yeah, and I think that's an adage from just design in general. Like that's a very common part of it.
No, it's from theater.
Well, probably theater preceded it. To be fair, honestly, probably designed to steal it. So, but I think that's that element of people will identify problems and not solutions. Anyways, all that to say is I just think, the number one thing is once you're kind of working on it, get it out there and push for it.
And like you said, before it feels comfortable. Because it's probably more valuable before it feels comfortable to do that. And finding that perfect moment. Or the perfect moment doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think you're not going to find it. But I think that there's like that kind of like you're standing at the top of the hill and you kind of are a little afraid to go down. You kind of also know you can go down, so you do it and you just sort of push yourself over. I think that's one of the other ones. Last one, and then you jump in. I would also just say, like, as someone who's made a professional pivot, you can do it. I.e., like, I kind of needed to hear that when I was starting. A few people let me feel that it was okay to make that move. You can do it. It's okay. It's going to be interesting and exciting and unique and special to you, but you can totally make this jump. Like I am literally in my head, I think, talking to me from 3 years ago. Like, it will work out. You don't know how. It probably won't work out the way you think you are, so just kind of keep moving. But you can totally do that creator leap, like whether it's making, streaming or anything else. Like, just sort of start, see where it takes you.
I would just say yes to all of that. We are not solo devs. And we really like collaboration. We like the small team model. So I would recommend it. I would recommend like find your people, find the people that fill out your skill set and complement you and challenge you. And I think a good way to do that is to participate in game jams, get out there, get paired with people to sort of find collaborators. But yeah, and also don't be afraid to collaborate. Don't be afraid to share credit. Don't be afraid to let someone take your idea and run with it, and you won't recognize it on the other side, and it'll be better. So that's worked well for us, and I would heartily recommend it.
Cool. Well, that's all my questions. Is there anything else you feel like you want to say?
No, just like thanks for having us. If you're listening out there, give Play Hilltop a follow
On X Twitter,
on
whatever it's
called. We're also active on there. You can follow us from that account. You can find Scott and I. We're decently active. He's better at it than I am. But otherwise, if you can, we're still in the stage where wishlisting the game helps a lot. Yeah. So if you find it interesting, I don't want you to take it if it's not your jam, but then I wonder why you're listening this long. Wishlisted, and then if you've played it, we're all guilty of this, but if you give it a review, that actually genuinely hugely impacts us and sort of our quality of life. So those are the things you can do, but otherwise, thank you for checking us out either way.
And try the game if you haven't already. Beck, do you want to invoice us for this group therapy session that you've facilitated? This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
That's okay. It actually has been so good to chat to you guys. It has been an absolute pleasure to hear so much about the game too. It's always really interesting. So I have definitely had the itch scratched about where all of the ideas and inspiration came from, which is great.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Indie Brew. If you want to know more about Lil Guardsman, you can watch my full review of the game here. And all of the social links for Scott and Artiom will be in the description, so make sure to give them a sneaky follow and don't forget to wishlist the game. Until next time, stay caffeinated.